My name is Dorothy May Callahan, and I want to start by telling you something that took me 67 years to finally understand. The people who call you a burden are usually the ones who've been living off your back all along. I know that might sound harsh. I know some of you listening to this right now might even flinch a little, because we were raised, women of my generation especially, to be gracious, to be accommodating, to smile through the discomfort and say, "Oh, it's fine, honey. Don't worry about me." We were taught that putting ourselves first was selfish, that needing things was inconvenient, and that the greatest virtue a woman could possess was the ability to give and give and give without ever asking for anything in return. I lived by that code for most of my life. I lived by it so faithfully that by the time I was in my mid-60s, I had given away so much of myself, my time, my money, my energy, my dignity, that there were mornings I would sit at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold in front of me, and I genuinely could not remember what it felt like to want something just for me. Not for my children, not for my grandchildren, not for the extended family that always seemed to appear when money was involved and disappear when hard times came knocking. Just for me. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, the second of 5 children born to parents who worked themselves to the bone and still never quite made ends meet. My father, Earl Callahan, worked at the textile mill for 32 years. My mother, Ruth, God rest her soul, cleaned houses 6 days a week and cooked for our family on the 7th. They were proud people, quietly proud, the way working people often are, because loud pride is a luxury you can't always afford when you're watching every dollar. What they gave us wasn't money, though there were years they stretched it thin enough to see through. What they gave us was a sense of duty, a bone-deep understanding that family takes care of family, that you show up, that you sacrifice, that you do what needs to be done without complaining, because complaining doesn't fill an empty plate or pay a past-due electric bill. I carried that lesson with me like a stone in my chest my entire adult life. I thought it was wisdom. I thought it was strength. It took me until I was 67 years old, sitting alone in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon, listening to a phone call I was never supposed to hear, to understand that what I had mistaken for devotion had actually been something much closer to exploitation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're just joining this channel for the first time, welcome. These are real stories from real women who found the courage to stand up for themselves when the world told them to sit down and be quiet. If these stories speak to something in your heart, and I have a feeling this one will, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. There are more of us out here than you might think. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. To understand how I got to that Tuesday afternoon, you need to understand the world I came from and the life I built inside it. I was born in 1957, the year Sputnik launched and the nation held its breath watching the sky, waiting to see what would fall. Sometimes I think that year was a prophecy for my whole life. Always watching the sky, always waiting for something to fall. But I didn't know that then. In 1957, in a small wood frame house on the east side of Macon, Georgia, all I knew was the smell of cornbread in the oven and my mother's hands, rough as bark, braiding my hair before Sunday church. We weren't poor in the way that makes people uncomfortable to hear about. We were the kind of working poor that is invisible, because we were always clean and always showed up and always acted like everything was just fine. My father's truck broke down once for 3 months, and he walked 4 miles each way to the mill, rather than ask anyone for a ride, because asking felt like weakness. That was the Callahan way. You handled your own business. You did not broadcast your struggles. You kept your chin up and your mouth shut. I was a good student, quick with numbers and even quicker with words. My third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told my mother I had a gift. My mother nodded politely and thanked her, and then told me on the walk home that a gift without hard work was just noise. So I worked hard. I read at everything I could get my hands on. I dreamed quietly of going to college. But life in our family didn't leave much room for quiet dreams. When I was 15, my father had an accident at the mill. Nothing catastrophic, thank the Lord. But it put him out of work for 8 weeks, and those 8 weeks nearly broke us. I took a job at the Five and Dime downtown after school, and on weekends, handing my paycheck directly to my mother every Friday, without even opening the envelope first. That was just what you did. The college dream faded the way those kinds of dreams tend to fade for girls like me. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, like a radio station getting farther and farther away, until one day you realize you can't hear it anymore, and you've stopped trying to tune it in. Instead, at 18, I started working full-time at the county hospital as a clerical assistant. I learned the filing systems, the billing codes, the way the whole machinery of that place worked. I was good at it. I was precise and dependable, and the kind of employee that supervisors took for granted because I never caused problems, which of course meant I also never got the recognition I deserved. Story of my life, as it turned out. I met Thomas Beaumont when I was 22. He was 26, worked in insurance, had a nice smile and a reliable car, and ambitions that sounded reasonable rather than grandiose, which I found deeply attractive after spending my whole childhood watching my father's big dreams shrink and shrink against the hard reality of our circumstances. Thomas wasn't going to set the world on fire, but he was steady. And after growing up the way I had, steady felt like everything. We married in June of 1980 in the same church where my parents had married. My dress was white eyelet cotton that my mother and I found at a second-hand shop in Atlanta and spent 2 weeks altering by hand. My mother cried. My father shook Thomas's hand so hard the man winced. My 4 siblings sat in the front pew, looking scrubbed and solemn and beautiful, and I thought to myself that this was it. This was the moment when the next chapter began. Thomas and I moved into a small rental house on Hillcrest Avenue. We were careful with money the way people who grew up without it always are. We saved. We planned. We talked about buying a house of our own someday, about having children, about building something that would last. Our daughter Renee was born in 1982. She was the most astonishing thing that had ever happened to me. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a mouth already open and demanding from her very first breath. I held her in that hospital bed and felt something rearrange itself permanently inside me. I understood then what my parents had given up for us without ever making us feel it. I understood the particular love that doesn't ask anything in return. Our son Marcus came 2 years later, in 1984. He was quieter than Renee from the start, more watchful. The kind of child who sat in the corner at family gatherings, studying the adults with those serious dark eyes. Thomas used to say Marcus was born old. I always thought he was born careful. We bought our house in 1988. It was a 3-bedroom ranch style on Oleander Drive. Nothing fancy, but it had a big backyard and good bones, and I loved it with a fierceness that surprised even me. I planted roses along the front fence the first spring we lived there. Deep red ones that bloomed every May like clockwork for the next 30 years. I painted every room myself. I knew every creak of every floorboard. That house was mine, in a way that felt almost sacred. Thomas and I had the ordinary marriage of ordinary people, meaning it had genuine love in it, and also long stretches of friction, misunderstanding, exhaustion, and the grinding tedium that comes with raising children and paying bills and trying to keep everything running. We weren't always kind to each other. We weren't always good at saying what we needed. But we were committed, and for most of our marriage, that commitment felt like enough. Thomas died in 2009 from a heart attack, sudden and total, on a Saturday morning in March when he was supposed to be raking the leaves in the backyard. He was 52 years old. Renee was 26. Marcus was 24. I was 51. I won't spend too much time on the grief because this story isn't really about grief. Or at least, not that kind. But I want you to understand what losing Thomas meant in practical terms. Because those practical terms are where this story really lives. Thomas had life insurance. Not extravagant, but adequate. He had a small pension from the insurance company where he'd worked for 22 years. I received a survivor's benefit. Between that and the house, which was paid off, and my own modest savings, and the salary I was still earning at the hospital, I had moved up over the years to office manager of the billing department. I was not wealthy, but I was stable. Genuinely, carefully, solidly stable. I was also, at 51, deeply alone. Renee had married a man named Kevin Walters 3 years before Thomas died. They lived 40 minutes away in Warner Robins, where Kevin worked in logistics. They had 2 children by then, my granddaughters Jalen and Brianna, who were 5 and 3 when their grandfather passed. They were the light of my world. Every weekend I drove up to Warner Robins, or they drove down to Macon, and those granddaughters climbed all over me and called me Grandma Dot and made me feel like something in my life still made complete sense. Marcus was unmarried, living in an apartment in Savannah, working a series of jobs that never quite seemed to stick. He was smart, brilliantly, almost painfully smart, but something in him resisted the kind of steady application that turns intelligence into stability. Thomas used to say Marcus needed to find his thing. By 2009, at 24, he still hadn't found it. And without Thomas there to gently push, I worried about him constantly. And it was that worry, that particular mother worry that never really goes away regardless of how old your child gets. That became the first crack in the wall. The first year after Thomas died, I held everything together through sheer force of will and routine. I went to work, I came home, I cooked dinner for one. Which is a quietly devastating thing that I don't think people who haven't done it truly understand. I kept the roses watered, I called my children every Sunday. I went to church on the Sundays I could manage it, and on the Sundays I couldn't. I sat in Thomas's recliner with my Bible open on my lap and pretended that counted. It was during that first year that Marcus started coming home more often. At first, it was just weekends, which I welcomed wholeheartedly. Having someone in the house again felt like oxygen after months of thin air. We'd watch television together in the evenings, eat the big meals I still cooked out of habit, sit on the back porch and talk about nothing in particular. Then the weekends stretched into weeks. Marcus lost his job at a marine supply warehouse in Savannah. He said there had been layoffs, and I believed him. Because why wouldn't I? He needed a place to stay while he sorted things out. Of course, he could stay with me. The house had 3 bedrooms, and only one of them was being used. Of course. He moved his things in one Thursday afternoon, in November of 2010. He told me it would be temporary. 6 months, tops. He lived with me for the next 7 years. I want to be clear about something, because I know what some of you might be thinking. Marcus was not a bad son. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive in any dramatic way that would make the situation obvious from the outside. He was just comfortable. comfortable in a way that kept getting more comfortable as time went by. And I kept letting it happen because he was my child, and I loved him. And the idea of telling him to go felt like a kind of abandonment I wasn't capable of. He got jobs here and there. Some lasted a few months, some barely a few weeks. Between jobs, and there were long stretches between jobs. He didn't pay rent, though we'd had the conversation about it many times. When he was working, he paid a little, enough to make me feel guilty about wanting more. When he wasn't working, he was just there, on my couch, in my kitchen, in the comfortable grooves of a life I had built for myself, filling up space the way water fills a container, naturally, completely, and without any particular awareness of what it was displacing. Renee's situation was different, but not as different as I liked to tell myself at the time. By 2012, Kevin's logistics job had gone through 2 rounds of downsizing, and his income had dropped significantly. They were struggling with their mortgage, struggling with the girls' school expenses, struggling with the ordinary weight of middle-class life when the income supporting it starts to wobble. They came to me for help, and I helped. I was their mother and grandmother. What else was I going to do? At first, it was small things. I bought school supplies for the girls, clothes when they had growth spurts, paid for Jalen's glasses when Kevin's insurance didn't cover the full amount. Then it grew. I helped with 1 mortgage payment that turned into 3. I co-signed on Renee's car loan when the old one finally died. I paid for a plumber when their pipes burst one January, and the repair bill was more than they had in savings. Each individual thing was justifiable. Each individual thing was an emergency, a need, something no reasonable mother or grandmother would say no to. I told myself this constantly. I told myself this even as the amount started adding up in the back of my mind to a number that made me quietly breathless when I looked at it directly. Between Marcus living with me rent-free and the ongoing help I provided to Renee and Kevin's family, I was spending, by my rough estimates, somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 a year beyond what I spent on myself. I was earning a decent salary, but I was 62 by then. Retirement was not a distant abstraction anymore. It was a real horizon that was getting closer every year, and every time I did the math. And I always did the math because numbers were my profession. The picture was a little less comfortable than I wanted it to be, but I didn't say anything. Because this is what we do. Women of my generation. Women who were raised the way I was raised. We don't say anything. We manage. We absorb. We make it work. We tell ourselves that family is worth any sacrifice, and we believe it, because the alternative, believing that your children are taking advantage of you, is a thought too painful to sit with for very long. I retired from the hospital in January of 2019, a month after my 62nd birthday. It wasn't entirely voluntary. The hospital had undergone a major restructuring, and my position, along with 17 others in the administrative departments, had been eliminated. I received a modest severance package and my pension, which was decent but not lavish. Combined with the Social Security I would start drawing in a few years, I had done the calculations. I could live comfortably on Oleander Drive for the rest of my life, as long as I was careful, as long as things didn't change. Of course, things changed. Marcus lost his job again 6 months after I retired. This time, he didn't even tell me directly. I found out because his bank started calling the house phone, and when I asked him about it, he looked at the floor and explained that he'd been let go 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks he'd been home every day while I was grocery shopping and tending my roses and going about my life, and he hadn't said a word. Just let me go on thinking he was heading into Savannah every morning the way he'd claimed. I felt something shift in me when he told me that. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet, internal shift, like a picture frame on the wall that's been slowly tilting for years and has finally gone noticeably crooked. I felt it and I noticed it. And then I smoothed my expression and said, "We'll figure it out, baby." Because that's what I always said. We'll figure it out. What I meant, without letting myself consciously realize it, was, I'll figure it out. I'll carry it. I'll absorb it. That's what I do. And meanwhile, Renee was calling more. She was always calling more during difficult periods. And 2019 was difficult for everyone in my world. Kevin had gotten a new job, but it required travel, long stretches away from home. And Renee was managing the girls, who were now teenagers, which is its own particular kind of warfare. Mostly on her own. She was stressed and overwhelmed, and she called me the way she'd always called me, the way I'd always made myself available to be called, as her first and most reliable resource. What I started noticing, and what I kept pushing away from my conscious mind because examining it too closely felt disloyal, was a pattern in the calls. Renee almost never called just to talk. She almost never called to ask how I was doing, how retirement was treating me, whether I was lonely, whether I was okay. She called when something had gone wrong. She called when a bill was due. She called when she needed me to take the girls for a weekend so she could breathe. She called when she needed something. Now, I want to be fair to Renee, because she is my daughter, and I love her, and I know that life is complicated, and that people in survival mode often lose the capacity for the kind of reciprocal attention that relationships require. I know that. I understood it then, on some level. But I was also 62 years old, recently retired, adjusting to a life without the structure I'd had for decades, living alone in a house with my adult son who was between jobs again, missing my grandchildren, missing Thomas, missing, in some way I couldn't quite name yet, myself. And nobody was calling to ask if I was okay. I was going through a lot of my own things, and not one person in my family seemed to notice. The thing about being the strong one in a family is that your strength becomes invisible. It stops being something people appreciate and starts being something people assume. Like gravity, like air. Nobody thanks the ground for holding them up. Nobody calls to check on the air. By 2020, when the world turned upside down and the pandemic settled over everything like a gray wool blanket, I was 63 years old, living with my son who had not been consistently employed in years, and supplementing the finances of my daughter's family on a monthly basis. I had not taken a vacation since 2015. I had not bought myself anything that wasn't strictly necessary since my retirement. I drove a 2014 Honda Accord with 140,000 miles on it and a heater that worked only intermittently. And every time I thought about replacing it, I thought about something else I could do with that money that would help someone else. I was, in the most literal possible sense, a resource. I had been functioning as a resource for so long that it had become my primary identity. Dorothy Callahan. Reliable. Dorothy Callahan. Available. Dorothy Callahan. Good for it. What I had not been in a very long time was a person. During the pandemic, the isolation clarified things in ways I hadn't expected. When the world slows down and goes quiet, the things you've been drowning out with busyness start to get very loud. I had long stretches of time alone in my thoughts. Marcus kept mostly to his room with his video games and his phone, emerging mainly for meals. And in those quiet stretches, I started thinking, really thinking, about where I was and how I'd gotten there, and whether this was what I'd actually chosen, or whether I'd simply never stopped to ask myself the question. I started writing in a journal. Nothing fancy, just a yellow legal pad I found in the back of the kitchen junk drawer. Every morning with my coffee, I would write about what I was feeling, what I was remembering, what I was noticing. It was the first time in years that I had given any real attention to my own inner life. And what I found there surprised me. I found anger. Not the sharp, hot anger that you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic or says something unkind. This was older than that, more layered. It was the slow-burning kind of anger that builds up when you have swallowed your needs and your voice and your wants for so long that the suppression itself has become a form of injury. I was angry, and I had been angry for years without letting myself know it. And beneath the anger, I found something even more unsettling: fear. I was afraid, not of being alone. I'd made a kind of peace with solitude over the years. I was afraid of the numbers. I was afraid of what my retirement account actually said when I looked at it with clear eyes, as opposed to the semi-averted gaze I'd been using for the past several years to avoid confronting the full picture. I was afraid that I was 63 years old, and I had been steadily, generously, lovingly transferring my financial security to other people, and that if I kept going the way I was going to end up in genuine trouble, real trouble, the kind that happens when a woman in her 70s has depleted her savings, and her children are used to receiving rather than giving, and the stack doesn't add up anymore. I sat with that fear for a long time. I sat with it through that first lockdown spring, through the hot summer of 2020, through the long, strange fall when the election happened, and the world felt like it was vibrating with something just on the edge of breaking. And I started paying closer attention to things I had previously let myself not notice. The first moment I can point to, the first specific, distinct moment when something that had been sleeping inside me opened one eye and looked around, happened in October of 2020. I had driven to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication, a trip I made every month with the regularity of a ritual. It was a gray Tuesday morning, cool enough for a jacket, the kind of day that in Macon smells like wood smoke and dried leaves, and the very edge of winter coming. I was standing in line at the pharmacy counter, my card in my hand, when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. It said, "Can you grab me some of those protein bars? The big box at Costco. And maybe some of that shampoo I like." I looked at that text for a moment. Not an unusual request. He sent requests like that regularly. Little additions to my grocery runs. Things he needed, things he'd run out of. I always got them. I never thought much about it. But standing in that pharmacy line, I looked at the text, and then I looked at my card in my hand, and then I looked at my bank balance. I had my banking app pulled up because I'd been checking the charge before I paid. And I felt something move through me. Not anger yet, more like recognition. Like seeing something that had always been in the room, but that you had unconsciously trained your eyes to slide past. I was 63 years old, on a fixed income, standing in a pharmacy line paying for my blood pressure medication. Medication, I should note, that I was taking in part because of chronic stress, which my doctor had been telling me for years I needed to reduce. And my adult son, who was 46 years old and living in my house and not paying rent, was texting me to pick him up protein bars and shampoo. I bought the medication. I did not buy the protein bars. I drove home with a very specific feeling in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet, but that I recognized as the beginning of something. The second moment came in December of that same year, a few weeks before Christmas. Renee called on a Thursday evening, which was unusual. She usually called on weekends. I was in the kitchen making soup, and I answered with a wooden spoon still in my hand. genuinely glad to hear her voice. She didn't ask how I was. She launched directly into the reason for the call, which was that Jalen, my older granddaughter, 18 now, about to start applying to colleges, had fallen in love with a particular university in Atlanta that was going to be expensive, and they were trying to figure out the financial picture, and they were hoping I might be able to contribute. I asked Renee how much they were thinking. She said she wasn't sure yet, but maybe somewhere around $10,000 to start, and then more going forward if Jalen got in. I stood there in my kitchen with my wooden spoon in my hand, and the soup beginning to smell like it was sticking to the bottom. And I did what I always did. I told her we'd talk about it. I told her I would see what I could do. I did not say yes outright. Some small, newly awakened part of me resisted that. But I also did not say no. After I hung up, I stood at the stove and stirred the soup and tried to do the math in my head. What I had, what I spent, what I gave, what would be left. The numbers were not comfortable. They had not been comfortable for a while, but somehow in this moment they felt more urgent, more real, more impossible to fudge. I called my friend Adeline that night. Adeline Parker had been my friend since we worked together at the hospital in the 90s, and she was the one person in my life who I could be completely honest with about money without feeling ashamed. She was practical in the way that women who have survived things tend to be practical, without sentimentality, without drama, just clear-eyed and direct. I told her about Renee's call. I told her about Marcus. I told her about the numbers. Adeline was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that I wrote in my yellow legal pad the very next morning. "Dorothy, a well that runs dry doesn't do anybody any good, not even the people who needed the water." I thought about that for a long time. The third moment that stands out in my memory happened in February of 2021. Marcus had gotten a new job, a warehouse position that he seemed genuinely enthusiastic about, more so than the previous ones. And for a few weeks things felt lighter. He was getting up in the mornings. He was paying small amounts toward the household expenses. He came home in the evenings tired in the productive way, rather than the hollow way. And then, one Saturday morning, I overheard him on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was coming down the hallway to get my sweater from the hall closet, and his bedroom door was open, maybe 6 inches, and his voice was carrying more than he realized. He was talking to someone, a friend from the tone, and he was complaining. He was talking about the job, about how it was beneath him, about how he couldn't believe he was in his 40s doing warehouse work. And then he said something that stopped me in the hallway, as completely as if someone had grabbed my arm. He said, "It's fine, man. I'm not sweating it. I've got my situation covered at home. My mom's not gonna let me go without." I stood very still in the hallway. My sweater was 3 feet away. I did not go get it. My mom's not gonna let me go without. I turned that sentence over and over in my mind for the rest of that day. The way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling its weight and edges. He had said it without shame, without any awareness that it was something to feel complicated about. Just a plain statement of fact. His situation was covered. His mother would not let him go without. He was 47 years old. I was 63 years old. I had high blood pressure and a fixed income and a retirement account that had been growing more slowly than I needed it to grow. And I was his situation being covered. That night, I opened my legal pad and wrote for 2 hours. I wrote everything I'd been thinking and not thinking, feeling and not feeling, seeing and not letting myself see. I wrote until my hand cramped, and then I kept going. And when I was finished, I looked at what I'd written, and I saw, laid out in my own messy handwriting, the complete shape of something I had been too afraid to look at directly. I had been enabling my children, not out of love, or not only out of love, but out of fear. Fear of their struggle, fear of their disappointment, fear of the look on Renee's face if I said no, the sound in Marcus's voice if I told him it was time to stand up on his own. Fear, most of all, of not being needed, because if I wasn't the one they turned to, what was I? If I wasn't managing everyone else's problems, who was I? The fourth moment came in April of 2021, tax season. I was doing my taxes, always did them myself, because 30 years in hospital billing had given me more than enough comfort with financial forms. And I sat down with all my paperwork spread across the kitchen table the way I always did, organized and labeled, everything in its right place. And for the first time in years, I made myself actually look at it. Not the individual line items that I could justify in isolation, but the whole picture. Every dollar that had gone out of my accounts over the previous 12 months, and where it had gone. The number was worse than I'd let myself imagine. I had given, over the course of 2020 alone, nearly $22,000 to my children. Between Marcus's free rent, calculated at market value, the regular cash I'd given Renee and Kevin, the extra money for the girls, the groceries, the car insurance Marcus had let lapse for 4 months that I'd quietly brought current. $22,000. My total income that year, between pension and the Social Security I'd started drawing, was $38,000. I had given away nearly 60% of my annual income to my adult children, while telling myself I was comfortable. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, a very long time. My coffee went cold. The dog next door barked at something, and then went quiet. The afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor the way it always did, slow and golden, and I sat in it and looked at my numbers and felt something I can only describe as a great, clarifying stillness. The fifth moment came in June of 2021, and this one is the hardest to talk about because it involved my granddaughter Jalen, who I adore, and who didn't do anything wrong, but who showed me, without meaning to, how deep the pattern ran. Jalen had been accepted to Georgia State University in Atlanta. It was a wonderful thing, and I was genuinely proud and happy. I had attended her acceptance party at Renee's house, brought a cake from the good bakery downtown, sat in Renee's living room, watching Jalen beam with that particular young person joy that is one of the most beautiful things in the world. And at some point during the party, I heard Jalen on the phone in the kitchen, talking to a friend about the upcoming year. I heard her say, with the casual confidence of someone who has never had reason to doubt their safety net, "Yeah, money's not really gonna be an issue. My grandma's got us. My grandma's got us." 18 years old, bright and beautiful, and full of the future. And she had already been raised to understand that Grandma was the resource. Grandma's got us. It had been so thoroughly normalized, this dynamic, this arrangement, this expectation, that it had been passed down to the next generation without anyone even noticing it was being transmitted. I drove home from that party holding the steering wheel, a little tighter than usual, and I thought about what it would mean for Jalen to grow up, believing that someone else's resources were reliably available to her. What it would teach her about money, about relationships, about what women are for. I thought about my mother cleaning other people's houses 6 days a week. I thought about my father walking 4 miles each way to the mill rather than ask for a ride. And I thought, somewhere between their pride and my generosity, something had gone very wrong. The 6th moment happened in the first week of September 2021, and it is the one that finally broke something open in me, in a way I could no longer push back down and ignore. Renee called on a Sunday evening. I was on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the last of the summer light fade over the backyard. The roses in their end-of-season bloom, still beautiful, the way things often are right before they let go for winter. Renee called, and she did not ask how I was, and she did not ask what I had been doing, and she did not mention the birthday I'd had the previous month. My 64th birthday, which she'd acknowledged with a text message and a promise to do something together soon that had not materialized. She called because Kevin had been passed over for a promotion he'd been counting on, and the financial picture was tight again, and she needed me to help cover Jalen's first semester at Georgia State. I asked how much. She said $8,000. I said I'd think about it. After I hung up, I sat on that porch for a very long time. The last light drained away, and the yard went dark, and still I sat there. I thought about my own accounts. I thought about what my financial advisor, a woman named Sandra Hewitt at the Merrill Lynch office downtown, had told me 6 months earlier when I'd finally made an appointment to review everything with clear eyes, that at my current rate of spending and giving, if I lived to 85, which women in my family tended to do, I would run out of money when I was 79 years old. 6 years before the statistical end of my life. 6 years of what? I thought about that. I thought about being 79 and having given everything away and having nothing left and needing help myself. And I thought about who would answer. I thought about whether the people I had spent decades supporting without condition would be there to support me without condition in return. And I knew, sitting on that porch in the September dark, that the answer was probably no. Not because my children were bad people, but because they had never been taught to think of me as someone who might need anything. I had been too thorough in my self-erasure, too complete in my presentation of strength and availability and inexhaustibility. I had taught them, without meaning to, that Dorothy was the giver in this family. That was simply what Dorothy was. And somewhere between that Sunday evening and the Monday morning that followed it, something changed in me. Something quiet, but total. Like a key turning in a lock that has been stiff for years. Slow, effortful, and then suddenly, completely open. I was done. I didn't know exactly what that meant yet. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have the courage fully formed. But I knew, in the clearest part of my mind, in a place that felt absolutely certain, in a way I hadn't felt certain about anything in a very long time, that things were going to be different. I just didn't know yet how different they would turn out to be. The fall of 2021 was a season of growing tension in my house and in my heart, and I want to describe it carefully because it matters. The specific texture of those months matters to understanding what happened next. I had made a decision, or the beginning of a decision, but I hadn't acted on it. And in the space between deciding and acting, everything seemed to crystallize. I started noticing things with a new and uncomfortable sharpness, the way you notice every creak in a staircase once you've started to suspect the structure underneath might be compromised. Marcus had started a new job in late August, a delivery driving position that seemed stable enough, good hours, decent pay. For the first 6 weeks, he came home in the evenings with the energy of someone who is doing something purposeful, and I felt the familiar warmth of hope. Maybe this time, maybe this was the one that would stick. Maybe, quietly and without drama, the situation would resolve itself naturally. But by October, the pattern had shifted again. He was coming home later. He was sleeping in on weekdays when he was supposed to be at work. I didn't ask directly. I never asked directly. And that avoidance was part of my own culpability that I was only beginning to fully reckon with. Instead, I watched and waited and told myself stories that were more comfortable than the truth. And then, in the 3rd week of October, I came downstairs at 6 in the morning to find Marcus asleep on the couch with the television still on, still in his work clothes from the day before, an untouched dinner plate on the coffee table. He looked younger asleep. He always did. He looked like the watchful, serious little boy he'd been. And for a moment, I felt the old softening, the maternal reflex that is almost physical, almost involuntary, the pull toward protection and provision. Then I noticed his phone on the cushion beside him, screen lit with a notification. I wasn't trying to read it, but the screen was facing up and my glasses were on and the message was right there. And what it said was from someone named Darius. "Bro, you think your mom's gonna be pissed if she finds out you got let go again?" I looked at that message. I read it twice. Then I went to the kitchen and started the coffee and stood at the counter with my hands wrapped around my empty mug and thought very carefully about what to do. He had been fired, or let go, whatever the distinction was. And he hadn't told me. Again. How long ago, I didn't know yet, but he was sleeping on the couch in yesterday's work clothes, which told me he hadn't actually gone in the day before. And Darius's message, the phrasing of it, "pissed if she finds out," told me Marcus hadn't planned to tell me on his own. He'd been planning to let me go on thinking he was employed while he figured out his next story. The way he had before, the way he seemed to consider a reasonable approach. I sat down at the kitchen table. The coffee was still brewing. The morning was gray and quiet. The particular silence of early autumn when the birds have started migrating and the neighborhood hasn't fully woken up. And in that silence, I felt something I had been carefully keeping at arm's length for months arrive fully. And finally, I was angry. Not the sharp, hot anger of surprise. I was past surprise. This was the deep, rolling anger of someone who has finally allowed themselves to see a situation clearly after a long time of deliberately not looking. I was angry at Marcus, yes, but I was also angry at myself, at the choices I had made, the boundaries I hadn't set, the person I had allowed myself to become in service of keeping everyone else comfortable. I pulled out my yellow legal pad. It was filled by now, most of its pages covered in my cramped morning handwriting. Months of processing and reckoning and slowly arriving at the truth. I turned to a fresh page near the back and I wrote 2 words at the top. Enough. Now what? And then, for the first time, I started writing not about what had happened, but about what I was going to do. It was clumsy at first, tentative. I didn't have a complete plan. I had fragments, ideas, the beginnings of a direction. I knew I was going to have to talk to Marcus. I knew the conversation with Renee about Jalen's tuition needed to go differently than previous conversations had gone. I knew I needed to see Sandra at Merrill Lynch again, this time with my eyes all the way open. But before any of that, something happened that took the decision fully out of the slow, deliberate pace I'd been setting for myself and made it urgent. Something that I did not plan for and could not have anticipated. Something that, when I look back on it now, I understand was exactly what needed to happen to finally make me move. It was the phone call, the one I wasn't supposed to hear. I want to take a moment right here if you don't mind, because this next part of the story is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it, even now, years later. And if you're watching this and you've been nodding along, because some of this sounds familiar, because you've been the strong one, the reliable one, the one nobody checks on, I want you to know that you're not alone. What happened to me has happened to so many women in this country, and most of them never talk about it because they're ashamed. But there's nothing to be ashamed of. The shame belongs somewhere else entirely. And before I tell you about that phone call, give this video a like if you're still with me, because your support genuinely means everything to this channel and to the women whose stories we're trying to share. Every like, every subscribe, every comment helps us reach more people who need to hear that it is never too late to choose yourself. Now, the phone call. The phone call happened on a Tuesday afternoon in November of 2021, and I want to describe it to you exactly as it unfolded, because the details matter. The details are what made it real in a way that all my journal writing and all my quiet reckoning and all my slow interior arriving at the truth had not quite managed to make it. It was just after 2 o'clock. I know that because I had been watching the clock, waiting for 3, when I had a telephone appointment with Sandra Hewitt at Merrill Lynch, our second meeting in 6 months. This one specifically to go over what Sandra called a revised sustainability projection, which was her professional way of saying she wanted to show me on paper how long my money would last if I kept doing what I was doing. I had been dreading that call in the way you dread a doctor's appointment when you already suspect the news isn't going to be good. Marcus was home. He was almost always home by that point. It had been nearly 3 weeks since I'd found him asleep on the couch in his work clothes. And in the conversation that followed the next morning, he had confirmed what I already knew. He'd been let go from the delivery job after 2 weeks. He was sorry. He would find something new. He just needed a little time. I had said with more steadiness than I felt, "Marcus, we need to have a real conversation about the situation here. Not today, but soon." He had nodded, looking at his coffee cup, and said, "I know, Mom. I know." That conversation hadn't happened yet. I was still gathering myself for it, still turning over in my mind how to say what needed to be said in a way that was honest without being cruel, firm without being cold. I had been practicing the words in the shower, in the car, lying awake at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come. On that Tuesday afternoon, I was in the bedroom at the back of the house, on my hands and knees in the closet, doing something I had been putting off for months, going through the boxes on the high shelf. Thomas's things were up there. Not all of them, just the ones I hadn't been able to sort through yet, the ones that still felt too tender to touch. A box of his work files, a shoebox with cards and photographs, his old Timex watch in its velvet case. I had decided that morning, with the particular determination that sometimes arrives with no warning, that it was time. Time to go through those boxes, to decide what to keep and what to release, to stop letting the unfinished business of grief take up space. Literal, physical space that I needed back. The closet door was partly closed behind me. The house was quiet. Marcus's room was down the hall, on the other side of the house, and his door was closed as it usually was in the afternoons. I had pulled down the shoebox and was sitting cross-legged on the closet floor, with it open in my lap, looking at a photograph of Thomas and me from our first anniversary. Him in a terrible plaid blazer, me in a yellow dress I'd made myself, both of us grinning like we'd gotten away with something. When I heard Marcus's voice, he was on the phone. His door must have been open after all. Or perhaps he'd come out into the hallway without me hearing him. Sound carried strangely in that house sometimes, funneling down the hall in ways that surprised you. Whatever the reason, his voice was clear. Not shouting, just talking in the ordinary, unguarded way of someone who believes they are completely alone. He was talking to someone, and I could hear only his side of the conversation, but his side was enough. He was talking about me. At first, I thought it was a normal conversation, complaining a little about the job situation, the way adults do with friends. But then I heard something that made me go very still. He was saying, and I want to be precise here because these were words I have replayed in my memory so many times since that I know them with absolute certainty. He was saying that I was set in my ways and getting harder to deal with. That I had been on his case about the job situation. That living with me was starting to feel smothering. I sat in the closet with Thomas's anniversary photo in my hand, and I listened. Then he said something else. He said, laughing a little, the easy laugh of someone venting comfortably to a sympathetic ear, that the trick with me was not to rock the boat too hard. That as long as he handled me just right, I would keep things going. That I was soft when it came to family, and that he knew how to work that. He said his sister Renee had it down to an art form, that she'd figured out years ago that all you had to do was come to me with a problem and make sure I felt needed, and I'd open my wallet. I sat in that closet and I heard my son say, laughing, that his mother was easy to manage because she needed to feel needed, that his sister had turned it into an art form, and I felt something happen in my body that I can only describe as a physical sensation of heat. Not a flush, not embarrassment, but something more elemental, more total. Something that started in my chest and moved outward to my hands and the back of my skull and the soles of my feet. The photograph of Thomas and me slipped from my fingers onto the closet floor. I did not move to pick it up. I sat perfectly still, and I listened to my son finish his phone call. Heard him laugh again at something his friend said. Heard the door to his room close again. And then I sat in the silence that followed, in my closet, on the floor, surrounded by Thomas's things, and I stayed there for a long time. I did not cry. I want you to know that. I did not cry, because what I felt was not grief, or not primarily grief. What I felt was something older and harder and, in its own terrible way, almost clarifying. Like a photograph developing in a darkroom, the image emerging slowly, detail by detail, until suddenly the whole picture is visible, and you understand exactly what you're looking at. My children, both of them, apparently, in their own ways, had been managing me, the woman I had built my whole adult life around, loving and providing for and worrying about and sacrificing for, had been to them a resource to be strategically maintained, something to be kept comfortable and feeling needed so the resource would continue flowing. My need to feel needed, a need I had never even fully admitted to myself, though I'd circled it in my journal writing, had been identified and used like a key that someone had cut without my knowledge to a lock I hadn't known I was wearing. I thought about Renee saying my grandma's got us. I thought about Marcus saying my mom's not gonna let me go without. I thought about $22,000 in a single year and $38,000 in total annual income, and Sandra Hewitt's phrase, revised sustainability projection, and the number 79. 79 years old. No money left. 6 years before the end of my statistical life. And then I thought, no. Not a dramatic no. Not a shouted no. A quiet, absolute, bone-deep no. Of the kind that arrives when a person has finally allowed themselves to see clearly and has decided, with their whole self, that they will not look away again. I got up off the closet floor. I straightened my clothes. I picked up Thomas's photograph and looked at it for one more moment. That plaid blazer, that yellow dress. Those two young people grinning at the camera like they had all the time in the world. and then I placed it carefully back in the shoebox and put the lid on and set the box on the shelf. I walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. I sat down at the table, and when Sandra called at 3 o'clock exactly, I answered on the first ring, and I said, "Sandra, I need you to walk me through everything, all of it, from the beginning, because I'm ready to make some changes." Sandra's voice on the other end of the line shifted. I heard it, a slight brightening, a professional readiness. And she said, "Dorothy, I am so glad to hear you say that. So was I. So was I." What followed that afternoon, and that week, and that month, was the most deliberate and purposeful period of planning I had undertaken since Thomas and I had saved for our house in the late 1980s. It was also, in ways I hadn't anticipated, one of the most interesting and revelatory periods of my life, because here is what I discovered when I finally directed the same care and attention and organizational precision I had given to everyone else's problems for decades toward my own situation. I was actually very good at this. All those years in hospital billing, all those decades of managing household finances and keeping meticulous records and understanding how money moved. All of that was mine. It had always been mine. I had just been pointing it in every direction except the one that mattered most. The first thing I did right there on the phone with Sandra that Tuesday afternoon was ask her to build me a complete picture. Everything in, everything out. My assets, my liabilities, my current spending, my projected needs. I wanted the honest version, not the one softened around the edges to make me feel better. She walked me through it methodically, the way a good financial advisor does. Not with drama, just with facts laid out in sequence, so the picture assembled itself clearly. And the picture, when fully assembled, was this. I had a little over $214,000 in retirement savings. I had the house, valued at approximately $160,000, which I owned free and clear. I had my pension and Social Security, which together came to just over $3,000 a month. If I lived on my income alone, $3,000 a month, and did not touch my savings, I could be genuinely comfortable for the rest of my life. I could maintain the house. I could replace the Honda when it finally gave up. I could even, Sandra said with the careful precision of someone choosing their words, take a vacation occasionally. If I continued at my current rate of giving, she said, I would be in a materially difficult position within 10 years, possibly sooner. The difference between those two futures was almost entirely accounted for by what I was giving away. I sat with that for a moment, on the phone, and then I said, Sandra, I need to ask you something. Is there a way to set up my account so that automatic transfers, the ones I've set up for my children, can be discontinued? She said yes, easily, that I could do it myself online, or she could walk me through it. I said, let's do it right now. We did it right then, on that phone call. I stopped 3 automatic transfers, one to a checking account I'd set up to help cover Marcus's expenses. $150 a month that I'd been sending him even while he lived in my house rent-free, which, when I said it out loud to Sandra, sounded so absurd that I laughed, a short, startled laugh, and 2 transfers to Renee and Kevin's account, one for $300 a month and one for $200 that I'd labeled Girls in my banking app. Just like that, $650 a month stopped. In annual terms, $7,800 a year that would stay in my account. It felt, I have to tell you, extraordinary. Not triumphant, not angry, just extraordinary. Like taking off a pair of shoes you've been wearing for so long that you'd forgotten you had them on, and feeling the strange relief of bare feet on solid ground. But stopping the automatic transfers was only the beginning. The transfers were a symptom. The root of the thing was the dynamic itself, the expectation, the arrangement, the deeply entrenched understanding within my family that I was the resource and that resources did not say no. That part was going to require something more than a few clicks in a banking app. That part was going to require me to do something I had spent my entire adult life carefully, consistently, sometimes desperately avoiding. It was going to require me to have direct, honest, uncomfortable conversations with both of my children. I began the planning phase the way I begin everything important, with a list. Not a list of accusations, because this was never going to be about blaming anyone. They had done what they had done, partly because I had created the conditions for them to do it. That was my accountability, and I was willing to own it. But what they had done, and the way they had spoken about it, the managing, the working me just right, the art form, that was theirs. And I was going to address it. I sat at the kitchen table over the next week with my legal pad, and I wrote out, in careful detail, exactly what I wanted to accomplish and how. I wanted Marcus to move out of my house by the end of January, 2 months away, giving him enough time to make a real plan. I wanted to be honest with him about what I had heard, not as a weapon, but as an explanation, because I thought he needed to understand that I knew that the pretense was over, and that the relationship going forward was going to have to be built on something more honest than what we'd had. I wanted to tell Renee that I would not be contributing to Jalen's tuition. Not $10,000, not $8,000, not $1,000. I wanted to explain why, calmly and without cruelty. And I wanted her to understand that my decision had nothing to do with how much I loved Jalen, and everything to do with how much I needed to love myself. I also, and this part took me several days to arrive at, wanted to do something that would make the change permanent. Something that would create a structural shift rather than just a conversational one. Because I knew myself well enough to know that conversations can be walked back. That without something concrete and external holding the new boundary in place, there was a real risk that the old patterns would reassert themselves, especially if my children push back. And I knew they would push back. I called Adeline and told her everything. The phone call in the hallway, the transfers, the plan. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the greatest gifts one friend can give another. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dorothy May Callahan, it is about time." We laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that has some tears hiding behind it, but a real one nonetheless. Adeline suggested I speak to an attorney, not to do anything dramatic, but to understand my options regarding the house, particularly in light of Marcus's residence there. She had a friend, a woman named Patricia Odom, who did estate planning and family law, and who, Adeline said, doesn't take any mess and explains everything plain. I made an appointment with Patricia Odom for the following Thursday. In the meantime, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list of things I wanted, not things I needed to fix or manage or provide for other people, things I personally wanted for my own life. I sat at the kitchen table one evening. Marcus was in his room, the house was quiet, and I wrote the list slowly and deliberately, the way you write something that deserves to be taken seriously. I wanted to go to Savannah. I had lived in Georgia my entire life and had somehow never spent real time in Savannah, and I wanted to walk those oak-lined streets and see the squares and sit by the water and eat shrimp somewhere that overlooked the river. I wanted to replace my Honda before it became a safety issue, rather than an aesthetic one. I wanted to take a class. Something I'd read about at the community center, a watercolor class that met on Tuesday mornings. I had never painted anything in my life, but the idea of it called to me in a way I couldn't fully explain and didn't feel the need to. I wanted, most of all, mornings that were mine. Quiet mornings without someone else's needs arriving before I had finished my first cup of coffee. I looked at that list for a long time. It was not an extravagant list. It was not the list of a selfish woman. It was the list of a 64-year-old person who had been waiting a very long time to be allowed to want things, and who had finally understood that the waiting had been self-imposed. I folded the list and put it in the front of my legal pad, behind the cardboard cover. I wanted it there where I could see it, a reminder of what I was moving toward, not just what I was moving away from. Patricia Odom's office was on Mulberry Street, in a building that smelled of old wood and good coffee. Patricia herself was a small, precise woman in her late 50s with natural silver hair cut close to her head and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She had the energy of someone who had heard everything and been surprised by very little of it, which was exactly the energy I needed in that room. I told her everything: the living arrangement, the financial transfers, the phone call in the hallway. She listened with the focused attention of a professional and took notes in a small leather notebook without looking up. When I finished, she put her pen down and looked at me over her glasses. She asked me what outcome I was looking for. I said, "I want my house back. I want my financial independence back. I want my children to understand that what happened cannot continue. And I want to make sure that I am legally and financially protected going forward." Patricia nodded slowly. She asked a series of careful, practical questions. Was Marcus's name on the deed? No. Had he ever paid rent formally, with any written agreement? No. The arrangement had always been informal. Did he receive any mail at the address? Yes, for years. She explained the legal concept of tenancy by estoppel. The idea that in some states, a person who has lived somewhere long enough, even without a formal lease, may have acquired certain rights. She said Georgia law was relatively clear in situations like mine, and that a properly documented request to vacate, followed by a formal notice period if he did not comply voluntarily, was well within my rights as the sole owner of the property. She also recommended, and this is the part I want you to pay particular attention to, because it is the piece of advice that proved most consequential, that I make certain changes to my estate documents. Specifically, that I update my will, which had not been touched since the year after Thomas died, and which, in its current form, divided everything equally between Renee and Marcus in a way that had made sense at the time, but that I was now reconsidering. I had not, before that meeting with Patricia, really allowed myself to think about the will. It felt like tempting fate, like something to be left vague and unexamined. But Patricia walked me through it calmly, practically, the way she walked through everything, as a set of decisions to be made by a competent adult in possession of the relevant facts, which is exactly what I was. I did not make any dramatic changes that day. What I did was authorize Patricia to draft updated documents for my review. Documents that reflected my actual circumstances, my actual wishes, and my actual priorities, rather than a decade-old set of assumptions that had never been revisited. Walking out of her office onto Mulberry Street, into a sharp November afternoon, with the pecan trees bare against the sky, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt like a person with a plan. My own plan, made for my own reasons, in my own interest. I went to the good diner on Riverside Drive and ordered the turkey melt and a piece of coconut cream pie. And I ate every bite, and I did not feel guilty about a single one of them. The following week, I went back to Sandra at Merrill Lynch with a new question. I wanted to know how to restructure my accounts so that they were accessible to me alone, not locked away. I still wanted liquidity, still needed to be able to manage my money in the ordinary ways. But I wanted a clear barrier between my financial life and anyone else's expectations about it. Sandra walked me through a set of arrangements. A trust structure was one option, though she recommended I coordinate with Patricia on that, which I did. In the meantime, we changed beneficiary designations, adjusted account structures, and set up what Sandra called a personal sustainability budget, which was essentially a monthly plan for what I spent on myself, what I kept in savings, and what, if anything, I might choose to give to family. That last category, Sandra said carefully, was entirely up to me. She just wanted me to make sure it was a choice, every time, not an assumption, not an obligation, a choice. I like that framework very much. A choice, every time, no automation, no default generosity that operated independently of my actual decision-making. By the second week of December, I had a meeting set with Marcus for the Saturday before Christmas. I had a meeting set with Renee for the Saturday after. I had prepared what I wanted to say to each of them, not as a script, but as a set of clear intentions, of things I needed them to understand, spoken from a place of love that was no longer willing to sacrifice itself in order to be expressed. And the night before I spoke to Marcus, I sat at the kitchen table with my legal pad and my cup of chamomile tea, and I wrote at the top of a fresh page, "Tomorrow." Here we go. I was ready. After 64 years, I was finally, completely, unambiguously ready. The Saturday I chose to speak to Marcus was the 18th of December, 2021. I remember the date precisely because it was exactly 1 week before Christmas, and there had been a part of me. The old part, the part that was still running old programming, that had suggested maybe I should wait until after the holidays. Give him one more Christmas before the disruption. Be generous with the timing. I had recognized that voice and declined to listen to it. The morning was cold by Georgia standards. 38 degrees, heavy gray sky threatening something. The bare-limbed pecan tree in the backyard standing very still in the windless air. I had been up since 5:30. I had made coffee and sat with it and gone over my intentions one more time. Not the specific words, but the spirit of them. Honest, direct, kind, firm. All 4 of those things at once, which is harder than it sounds and which I had been practicing in the shower for 2 weeks. Marcus came downstairs at 9:15, still in the oversized t-shirt he slept in, hair uncombed, moving through the kitchen with the comfortable ease of someone who has inhabited a space so long it has become invisible to them. He poured himself coffee from the pot I had already made. He opened the refrigerator and stood in front of it for a moment, deciding, and then took out the leftover chicken from the night before. I said, "Marcus, come sit down. I need to talk to you about some things." The way he looked at me when I said that, I want to describe it carefully, because it told me something. There was a flicker, just a brief flicker of something behind his eyes. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition. Like some part of him had been expecting this, and had just received confirmation that the expectation was about to be fulfilled. He sat down. I started by saying that I loved him. I meant it. I will always mean it. There is nothing that happened between us then or since that has changed the fundamental fact of that love. But I had learned, through a lot of writing and a lot of thinking and one conversation with Patricia Odom that had shifted something in my understanding, that love is not the same thing as permission, that you can love someone with your whole heart and still require them to respect you. That requiring respect is not a condition on love. It is a condition for the kind of relationship in which love can actually thrive. I said that the arrangement we had been living with for the past decade was not working. Not for him, really. I said this, and I meant it, because I had come to understand that the comfortable dependence I'd enabled was not actually good for him either. It had kept him from developing the muscles he needed. It had made life too easy in ways that kept it from becoming his own. And not for me. I said that too. Not for me. I told him what my financial picture actually looked like, in plain terms, because I felt he deserved the truth, and because I thought the truth might reach him, in a way that general statements about time and effort would not. I did not tell him about the phone call. I had gone back and forth on this for weeks. Whether to tell him what I'd heard, whether to name the specific things he'd said, and in the end I decided against it. Not to protect him from embarrassment, though there was some of that, but because I had realized that if I made this conversation about what he'd said on the phone, it would become a conversation about that, about whether I'd heard correctly, about what he meant, about context and defense and explanation. I didn't want that conversation. I wanted the other one, the one about what was going to be different. I told him I needed him to begin making arrangements to move out. I said I was giving him until February 1st, 6 weeks, which was more than enough time to make a real plan, and that I would not be extending that date. I said I wanted us to spend those 6 weeks as honestly as possible, no pretending on either side, no performances of normalcy over a situation we were both aware was not normal. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the table. He looked at me. And in that look, there was something I hadn't expected, hadn't let myself hope for. Something that looked like recognition, not the flicker from before. This was deeper than that. This was the look of someone who, on some level, knows they've been caught in a way that they can't entirely argue with. He said, "I know I've let things go on too long, Mom." Just that. Not a speech, not a defense, not the litany of circumstances and bad luck that I had expected. Just that simple, plain acknowledgement. I said, "I know you do." We sat in the kitchen for a while longer. We talked, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years, about what he wanted his life to look like, about the warehouse job and the delivery job and the pattern he'd fallen into, about what it had felt like for him to watch his father die young and then to somehow never find his footing afterward. There were things I heard in that conversation that I had not known, had not let myself ask about, because asking felt too much like opening something I might not be able to close. By the time he went upstairs an hour and a half later, nothing was resolved in any dramatic sense, but something between us had shifted into a more honest shape than it had occupied in a very long time. He moved out on January 28th, 3 days before the February 1st date. He had found a room in a house share with 2 other men in their 40s, working-age men with their own lives, their own responsibilities, the kind of ordinary adult situation that I hoped would have its own normalizing effect. He loaded his things into a rented truck on a gray January morning. I stood on the porch and watched and felt something I can only describe as a mixture of grief and relief so thoroughly blended that I couldn't separate them. Didn't try. He hugged me before he got in the truck. A real hug, long enough to mean something. He said, "I'm sorry I made you have to do this, Mom." I said, "Make it worth it." He laughed, a short, surprised laugh, and got in the truck and drove away. I stood on the porch in the January cold, and looked at the street where the truck had been. And then I looked at my house. My house. The one I'd painted room by room and planted roses in front of and known every creak of every floor. And I felt something settle over me that I can only call peace. My house, my life, my terms. The conversation with Renee happened on January 8th. I had moved it earlier than originally planned because she had called me twice in the intervening weeks about Jalen's tuition. And both times I had said, "We'll talk soon." And I could hear in my own voice that the delay was costing me something. I drove to Warner Robins on a Sunday. I had thought about whether to do it on the phone or in person, and had chosen in person because I felt, rightly or wrongly, that certain things deserved to be said face to face. That the weight of what I needed to say required presence. Renee opened the door looking surprised to see me. I'd told her I was coming to visit, but not the specific reason, which, in retrospect, I think she sensed anyway, because she had the particular, careful expression of someone who is waiting to find out what kind of conversation this is going to be. Kevin was there, and the girls, and we had lunch first. I had brought things from the bakery, the good one on Riverside Drive, and we sat around the table and ate and talked about ordinary things. And I watched my granddaughters, 18 and 16 now. Jalen's so close to leaving, Brianna already halfway there in some ways. And I felt the full weight of what I was about to do, which was not take anything away from them, but which would probably feel that way to their mother for a while. After lunch, Kevin took the girls to the movies because he is a perceptive man, and he had clearly read the room. Renee and I sat in her living room. The house was quiet. I had driven 40 minutes and was about to say things I had never said to my daughter in 40 years, and my hands were very still in my lap, which is what happens to me when I am using every bit of my composure on the words rather than the body. I told her I loved her. I told her I was proud of who she was and of the mother she had become. I told her that my grandchildren were among the greatest joys of my life, and that nothing I was about to say changed any of that. And then I told her the truth. I told her about the financial picture. What I actually had, what I actually needed, what the projections looked like. I told her that the monthly transfers had stopped in November and would not be resuming. I told her that I would not be contributing to Jalen's tuition. Not because I didn't want to. Not because I didn't love Jalen. But because I could not do it without compromising my own security in ways that would, in the end, make me a burden to my children rather than a support. I use that word deliberately. Burden. I had chosen it carefully because I wanted her to feel it, not cruelly. I did not say it with cruelty, but clearly. I wanted her to understand that the word that applied to the direction I had been heading was exactly that, and that I refused to let it become true. Renee was quiet for a while. Then she said, and I could hear both hurt and something that might eventually become understanding in her voice. "Mom, we counted on you," I said. "I know. And I let you count on me in ways that weren't fair to either of us." She said, "So what are we supposed to do about Jalen's school?" I said, "There are loans, there are grants, there are work-study programs. There are schools with lower tuition that are still excellent. Jalen is bright, and she will find a path. I believe that completely." Renee looked at me. I looked back at her. It was a long look, the kind that passes between people who know each other very well and are renegotiating the terms of what they've always assumed. She did not take it gracefully. Not entirely. She said some things that stung, that she felt blindsided, that she didn't understand what had happened to me. that she hoped I hadn't made some kind of decision I would regret. There were tears, hers, and briefly mine. It was not a comfortable afternoon, but when I drove home, when I got in my 2014 Honda Accord with its 140,000 miles and its intermittent heater and its familiar smell of my own life, I felt something I had not expected to feel after a conversation that hard. I felt proud, not pleased, not triumphant, proud. The quiet, bone-deep pride of someone who has done something difficult for the right reasons, who has told the truth when it was costly, who has chosen themselves without apology. I drove home through the Georgia January, through the bare fields and the roadside pine stands and the particular flat gray light of the South in winter, and I thought about my father walking 4 miles each way to the mill because asking for help felt like weakness. I thought about how I had spent a lifetime confusing giving everything away with strength, and I thought that maybe, finally, I was beginning to understand the difference. The weeks that followed those conversations were not easy, and I want to be honest about that, because these stories sometimes get told as if the hard part ends with the decision, and everything after is smooth and bright and uncomplicated. That is not how life works, and you know it, and I owe you the truth. Marcus's departure left the house very quiet, quieter than I had anticipated. I had lived alone after Thomas died, but that had been a different kind of alone. The raw, freshly grieving kind that is full of the absence of a specific person. This was different. This was the silence of a chapter ending, of a long-held arrangement releasing. And it took some adjustment. Some mornings I would come downstairs and feel the empty rooms and think, for just a moment, that I had done something wrong. I let myself feel that. I wrote about it in my legal pad. And then I made my coffee and I reminded myself, as clearly and directly as I could, what I had actually done and why. And the feeling would settle. Renee and I did not speak for 3 weeks after the conversation in her living room. She called eventually, on a Tuesday evening in late January, just as I was finishing dinner. And she apologized for the things she'd said that had been too sharp. I apologized for having let things go on so long without an honest conversation. We did not reach full understanding that night, and I didn't expect to. What we reached was the beginning, a tentative new footing. Jalen ended up applying for and receiving a combination of merit scholarship and need-based grant that covered 60% of her first year at Georgia State. Kevin's sister contributed another portion. They found a way. They had always been capable of finding a way. It was only because I had been available to be found that they hadn't needed to. Marcus called me every Sunday, sometimes just briefly, sometimes longer. He had started working steadily again. A job in inventory management at a medical supply company that seemed, from what he told me, to be a genuine fit for the particular way his mind worked. He'd moved into his own apartment by March. He never spoke about the phone call I'd overheard in the hallway. Neither did I. I don't know if he suspected I'd heard it. I don't know if he'd eventually told the friend on the other end that things had changed. What I know is that in the phone calls we had after he moved out, he talked to me differently, with more directness, with less of the careful management I'd heard in his voice for years without fully recognizing what it was. He asked how I was doing. He asked what I'd been up to. He seemed genuinely, without strategy, interested. I had started the watercolor class at the community center in February, 3 weeks after Marcus moved out. It met on Tuesday mornings from 9 to 11:30 in a room with large north-facing windows that let in the kind of clean, consistent light that is kind to colors. There were 11 of us in the class, ranging in age from somewhere in their late 40s to a woman named Harriet, who was 81, and who painted with a ferocious concentration that I found deeply inspiring. I was terrible at watercolors, initially. Genuinely, freely terrible in a way that I found, to my own surprise, delightful. There was something remarkably freeing about being bad at something you had chosen purely because you wanted to do it, with no one else's needs or expectations in the picture. I mixed colors that turned into murky gray-browns. I lost control of the water and flooded my paper. I painted a vase of flowers that looked, according to the instructor, a gentleman named David, who always found something kind to say. Like it was in the Impressionist tradition. I laughed every single Tuesday for 6 weeks straight. By spring, something was improving. Not dramatically. I will never be a painter in any meaningful sense. But enough that I could look at what I was making and see something I'd intended. That small, incremental progress felt like one of the most satisfying things I had experienced in years. In April, I took myself to Savannah. I drove down on a Thursday morning, just me and the Honda, and a small overnight bag. And I spent 3 days walking the squares and eating good food and sitting on a bench in Forsyth Park, watching the fountain catch the light and thinking absolutely nothing urgent. I ate shrimp at a restaurant on River Street that overlooked the water, exactly as I had put on my list. I spent an afternoon in the Telfair museums looking at paintings and thinking about color. I sat in my hotel room on Friday evening with a glass of wine from a bottle I'd bought at a shop on Broughton Street and read a novel I'd been meaning to read for 2 years. On the way home on Saturday, driving north through the Spanish moss-hung low country, I felt something that I kept trying to name and that kept sliding away from names. It was something like wholeness, something like the satisfaction of being a complete person who inhabits her own life, rather than a resource that exists in relation to other people's needs. I thought about all the years I had not taken trips. Al.